This video was inspired by a YouTuber named NabTube who made a video based on his top 10 favourite bands. And I thought I wanted to do something similar. I think it's quite good for any channel to have these kind of videos as a basis. So whenever somebody stumbles across like a random video, maybe on a specific album, or depending on the channel, like a specific game or a film or whatever they're interested in, to have videos like top tens of their favourite versions of things, just to get a general idea of what a certain person likes. And that's the kind of thing that I like to see when I turn up on a channel that I've never actually sat and looked at before. So this is just bands. I'm not going to do artists. I'm going to do that in a separate video from this instead. And I'm going to start off with some honourable mentions. The first one I'm going to start off with is a band that I don't have a physical copy of their any of their albums for yet, and that's Cocteau Twins. Probably my favourite album by them is Treasure, but they're probably very, very close to being in the top 10. There's not a single album by them that I don't like. There's very few songs by them that I don't necessarily like. At the very, very worst, it's probably that they're not as memorable as some other albums, so they're definitely they're definitely in with a shout to be in the top 10 or at least close to it. But yeah, they're pretty close, and they would probably be in if I actually had a physical copy. But the first physical copy that I have will be Kraftwerk. So the story goes with this band. This was the first album that I ever bought, period. And how I got into them was basically that my brother showed me the music video for a song in this album called The Robots. And I was just blown away by it. I mean, it's an old music video from like the 70s or something, so it's not aged incredibly, but there's something very hypnotic about the video for me. And there's another song in this album called The Model, which I already knew, and so that inspired me to just go and get the album. And so in terms of the history of me and buying albums, this was the first one ever. This next band might be a bit surprising to some people, to not be in the top 10. But that would be Coldplay. Now, I know that Coldplay are one of the biggest bands in the world, and well, they're not in terms of music purists, I would say Coldplay aren't beloved by them, apart from the easy stuff, the early stuff, not the easy stuff. Probably after Viva La Vida, I think maybe people probably started falling away from them. The first few albums of Coldplay are really, really important to me, particularly this album, Parachutes. And for probably about as long as I can remember, Coldplay have always been in my life. And I think for anybody that grew up in the noughties, would probably feel the same way about this band. Everybody knew Yellow, everybody knew Fix You, everybody knew Viva La Vida. And so, well, I think in sort of the early stages of me enjoying music, this album and this band were very, very important. But I think I've just sort of outgrew them now. Two Door Cinema Club is the next one, and the story for this is more that one of their songs was in FIFA, and I'm an avid FIFA player, at least of the older games. I don't particularly love the newer ones. I'm a bit of an old man that way. But this album has a song in it called Sleep Alone, and that's the song that was in FIFA. And it was my favourite song in the game, so I decided, a couple of years later, I was like, do you know what, I want to find out more about this band. Um, it's not the only song that they've had in FIFA. They had another one called uh, Get Ready, I think it was called, from about 2018 or 2019. That was in FIFA as well. So, that's probably where a good amount of their fans have come from, at least in the early days. Um, but yeah, they're definitely up there. I don't enjoy some of their newer stuff in comparison, but I enjoy quite a lot of their music, um, particularly the album Tourist History. The next one might be a bit controversial considering some of the recent stories coming out about the lead singer specifically, and that would be the 1975. And I'm not here to talk about that whole ordeal. That's for other people to talk about and another time altogether, I suppose. But there are so many songs in this that I really enjoy. Yeah, it's not the only album. I like your second album as well. I've not listened to the rest, but I think this justifies them being very high up just because of my appreciation for these um, albums. Even though you've got The City, again, another song that was in FIFA, believe it or not, but actually, I never heard it until after I knew it was in FIFA, so I heard other songs by them first. A lot of the singles, so Robbers, Girls, Chocolate's another one. Although it's kind of difficult to tell what he's saying because he's got that Manc accent when he sings, and it's a bit tough to know what he's saying sometimes. But there's certain songs that are on the deluxe edition of this as well. My favourite being Antichrist. That's probably my favourite 1975 song altogether. Yeah, that's a big part of why I love this album as well, is even the deluxe edition versions of songs, or the songs that are included on the deluxe edition, are favoured by me, I should say. And this next one, although an older duo, they're probably one of the most recent bands that I've got into, if you would call them that. I'm going to call them a duo because that is two people, and that is Simon and Garfunkel. Now, I knew about Simon and Garfunkel for years and years, but I never ever bothered to listen to them other than maybe Cecilia or Sound of Silence, which is a meme these days. But those were the two songs that I knew. But this album and the Sound of Silence album both solidified for me that this is a duo that I really want to listen to more. There's not a single bad song in this album. There's not a single bad song in the Sound of Silence either, but they've shot up in my ranking over the past year. And hopefully by the end of next year, most likely, even maybe by the end of this year, depending on what I do, I will have listened to all of it, and they might actually be in my top 10 by then. But yeah, absolutely excellent front to back out of all the discography that I've heard. And I want to hear more of Paul Simon stuff as well after I'm done with these albums. And that's the end of the honourable mentions. So now we will get into the actual top 10. So number 10 is gonna be The Doors. Similar to Simon and Garfunkel, they have a pretty short discography, and well, from what I've heard, again, I just absolutely love it. This album is the one that got me into them. Surprisingly, I didn't know the songs. A lot of them are pretty popular, but I didn't know any of them, like Break On Through to the Other Side, Light My Fire, and obviously there's a couple of covers on here as well. I'm pretty sure Alabama Song's a cover and Backdoor Man. But the end, I mean, it's like nearly 12 minutes, but it's like an epilogue. It's one of the best songs ever written, in my opinion. Sometimes I'll literally just stick that song on instead of the whole album, but the whole album's short enough that you can sort of get away with playing it all anyway. You know, it's like, I don't know, it's about 45 minutes, something like that, but it certainly doesn't feel like it. It feels way shorter than that. But that would be number 10, The Doors. I know I basically just spoke about this album, but I've listened to LA Women and Stranger Days as well. Both also brilliant albums, but I don't want to be sitting here talking all day, so I want to keep this video, you know, shorter than 20 minutes. But I say that every single video, so we always fail in the end. Number 9, Tears for Fears. Now, it would have been funny if I had the Beatles for Revolution 9 since number 9. Number 9. But yeah, Tears for Fears is number 9, and again, not an overly long discography. They still release music, which I think is mad. I thought they would have stopped with the previous album that they done, but you know, they came back and last year and released another album, so you know, I'm all for that because I love Tears for Fears, but I thought they would have been done. And this band is sort of the reason for the name change of this channel, which I know I've not addressed yet. I know I've sort of done it silently and never uploaded a video or talked about it, but the whole idea behind the channel name was the song Everybody Wants to Rule the World. And me and other people who were obviously born after the 80s agree that it's sort of like, it feels like a window into the 80s itself, and it makes you nostalgic for the 80s even though I wasn't there. And that's why that's why the name Somebody Else's Nostalgia came up, because you know, I'm nostalgic for a time that I wasn't at. That would be somebody else's nostalgia technically, but that's where the name came in. But again, you know, you're talking mid-80s band, and all their albums that I've heard are magnificent. This album is pretty much perfect. There's not a problem with it. Very big singles on this as well. Obviously, Everybody Wants to Rule the World, Shout, an underrated gem in my opinion, and The Working Hour. The arrangement of that song is phenomenal. Excuse me. But yeah, what you call it? The saxophone solo at the start of that song is absolutely unbelievable, and there's Head Over Heels on this as well, which was another single. And so yeah, that's why they're here. Next band is Slow Dive. Now this is actually 3 albums in one. This I don't know if I ever spoke about it before, but it has Just for a Day. It has Savlaki, which is my favourite, and I don't even know how you say the name of this, so I'm going to butcher it, but Pygmalion. And I listened to this fairly recently, and I think it's still very good, but I don't think it's still quite as good as the first 2. But yeah, Slow Dive are probably my first proper introduction to shoegaze, and I can't get these albums back in. There we go. They were probably my first introduction to shoegaze, and well, Savlaki is one of my favourite albums of all time now. Just for a Day is definitely up there as well. Alison, Savlaki Space Station, When the Sun Hits is obviously one of the big songs from this album as well. But again, it's just perfect front to back Savlaki. And one album that I don't have by Slow Dive is their self-titled album as well. There's lots of great songs in there. So they've definitely shot up over the past couple of years as well. I mean, I didn't know who they were until probably 2021. And that is thanks to a good friend of mine, No Name. So I've got a lot of appreciation for him for introducing me to them. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have bothered listening to them. Next band, and I've already referenced them earlier, the Beatles. I don't feel like there's very many lists that can really exclude the Beatles. They're very important. It's between this and the next band on the list for what I remember being the first band that I ever listened to. It's, in my recollection, the first song I ever heard was Penny Lane, which could have been on this album, but it wasn't. Which would have even improved one of my favourite albums of all time still. But yeah, I've listened to everything by the Beatles. I'm in the middle of watching Get Back now, the documentary of when they were in the middle of making Let It Be, and seeing Paul McCartney in his heyday it makes you feel honoured to sort of be in his company, even though you're not technically in his company. But it's just really special watching them all together. It's sad in certain moments, but obviously we know how the rooftop gig went, so we know it worked out in the end for them, I suppose. But yeah, every band looks up to the Beatles, even if they don't want to admit it. I think it's true. And the next band that I want to talk about, which might be fairly low to some people, the Pet Shop Boys. And it's between the Pet Shop Boys and the Beatles for the first album that I ever heard. Sorry, the first band I ever sat and listened to, because Please was the first album I ever heard, as far as I'm aware. And well, they're probably the longest serving band for me in terms of like through the age of like 3 maybe through to now. They've been like a constant in my life, and I'd say they've been the longest. Whereas the Beatles, I didn't listen to them for a long time until I was maybe about 13 or 14 again, and then I started listening to them again, and then I started listening through all their albums through. Whereas the Pet Shop Boys, ever since back then, they've sort of always been there. There's never really been a space in time where I didn't listen to them, all the way through primary school, all the way through secondary school, and even still into my adult life. They're always there. So that's why they're this high up. Next band will be Depeche Mode, and I don't have any other studio albums at the moment, but technically this was the album that got me properly into them. My first experience with this band is it was a remix of Enjoy the Silence, which is on this album actually. You might probably not really be able to see that, but yeah, it's the 8th song in this, on the first CD, because this is all their singles, and it was a similar time to when I was listening to Kraftwerk a lot, and that's how my love started for both Depeche Mode and Kraftwerk, because I heard them both roughly at the same time, roughly when I was about 10 years old, and that blossomed into listening to things like Black Celebration. Ultra was probably one of the first albums I would have heard as well, because this has some of their 90s stuff, or the majority of their 90s stuff on it as well, like In Your Room, Barrel of a Gun, Useless, which is from Ultra, Walking in My Shoes. So this was basically the basis for everything else. And again, I've listened to all their albums, even their most recent one. And I saw a post very recently, I won't go into this too much, but they're not in the Spotify top 100 artists in terms of streaming numbers. And I don't know why, but I just feel like that surprises me. Another one that isn't is Bob Dylan, for very similar reasons, but they're both immensely popular and have been around for a long time. So to me, that's just quite surprising, but I don't know. Let me know what you think. Number 4, Radiohead. And I regret not getting into Radiohead a lot sooner. Mainly because they were at a festival very near me where I lived a few years ago, and I didn't really listen to the band at all at that time, so I didn't really care. And then a couple of years later, I got into them, and that was when the regret started to settle in, and I zoomed through all their albums in the space of a year. I know a lot of people tend to listen to multiple albums in a day, and that's not really my kind of thing. I don't like going through a discography that quick. I like to have a bit of time in between so that every album, sinks in properly. Instead, but the Bends, OK Computer, obviously, Kiddie, Hail to the Thief, and Rainbows, and A Moon Shaped Pool. They don't really tend to miss, even with their lesser albums. Pablo Honey still has good songs on it. And The King of Limbs, which again, it's nothing like this album, put it that way. It's a lot more electronic and bleeps and blips, if you want to call it that. But it's still a very, very strong part of the discography with songs like Lotus Flower and stuff like that, and Separator, which is one of my favourites. Bloom, Codex. I mean, it's never ending. Now we're starting to get into the top three, the big hitters. And number three will be U2. And I know how fun it is to shit on U2 these days for basically anyone. And I can't lie, I mean, they released Songs of Surrender this year, and I was very, very disappointed with it. 40 songs, and I probably liked about 5 of them. They were all just remixes of their older stuff. I mean, one on here was one of the remixes, and it was one of the songs that they released before as like a retrospective single, and it wasn't for me. But U2 are like one of the 3 bands that were with me, sort of next to the Pet Shop Boys, although they were a wee bit later than that. And over the years, I kept going through their albums, and they just spoke to me in a way that no other band really did at the time. I've always probably preferred U2 to Pet Shop Boys ever so slightly. But I don't think. I think one of the big parts of that is probably the fact that it was so easy for people to shit on the Pet Shop, not the Pet Shop Boys, U2. When I was growing up, nobody either cared about them or nobody liked them, and that made them feel more special to me in a way, because it was like they were speaking to me specifically instead of anybody else that I knew. It makes you feel slightly excluded in a way, but in hindsight, I don't think it really mattered that much. Although I do sort of regret not being open-minded to other people's music at the same time, because I was a bit of an elitist before I even knew what an elitist was. I was like, you just don't understand it, man. I mean, I done a solo talking U2 in school and everything. And that was when I discovered that nobody really knew who U2 were. And if they did know who U2 were, they didn't care. But they're special to me, so fuck everybody else. Top two. Now these two are they sort of go hand in hand. Because I've discovered both of them round about COVID. And number two is going to go to the Smiths. Now, in terms of Spotify stats, I listen to a lot of things on Spotify, right? That's where I usually get into things. To, sort of try before you buy type of thing. And the Smiths take up like my top 10 songs on there. In terms of like the most streamed. So I listen to the Smiths quite a lot, obviously, but I think they fill multiple moods, but they have a specific style. Whereas the next band, I think, fill multiple styles while also being great at all of them. And I don't know if it's the Smiths' short lifespan of being a band, like actually being a current band before they disbanded, that hurts them a bit in that regard, because if they stayed around, would they have changed their style? I mean, this album in particular was fairly different from their debut. But I think that might have contributed to the fact that a lot of their songs to outsiders are the same. whenever I talk to my parents about the Smiths, it's always, oh, all their songs sound the same, and I don't really agree with that. They're the same genre, but that doesn't mean they sound the same, you know? Um, but yeah, there's not a single bad song by the Smiths in my opinion. Although they only have about 80 songs, something like that. It may be shorter than that, maybe slightly more. Yeah, I don't, there's nothing bad about them in my opinion. Every single album is great. The only one I've not heard is a live one, but I will get around to that eventually. But yeah, not a bad word to say about the Smiths really. And say what you will about Morrissey, but I like him as well, to be honest. That's another thing that's probably quite controversial to say. But fuck it. And then we'll go to their 80s rivals, and that's number one. I don't know if this gave it away, but it's The Cure. um, Robert Smith is a fucking poet, and he knows how to write a good song. He knows how to make he knows how to build an atmosphere on an album and create a proper album experience. And Disintegration is the pinnacle of all of that. This is my favourite album of all time, which is why it's the one that I'm showing here. They had their pop era, they had their sort of goth era. I don't know if you would call it the goth era, but it was their early albums that was a lot darker in tone. I mean, when you title an album Pornography, you're hardly going for the upbeat sensibilities of pop music when you go for something like that. But this album sort of culminated everything that had come before, fused it all together and made one of the best audible experiences in music, in my opinion. It's obviously my favourite, so in my opinion, it's probably the best so far that I've heard, up there with some of the other albums by bands that I've mentioned so far. War's up there for me. OK Computer and Kid A, The Queen is Dead by the Smiths. I'll make a list about that at some point as well. But yeah, I don't think this would have been all that surprising for some people to see, considering that's sitting there. It's probably a big spoiler. But yeah, The Cure are number one in my books at the moment. They're like a good mixture of everything that I'd heard before. They had the guitars, they had the synths, that I loved of, all the way through the 80s, but they fuse them both and make it their own. And I feel like The Cure's music just sounds like The Cure. I don't think there's anything quite like it. And well, yeah. So that makes the end of the top 10. And that's the end of this video. Probably another pretty long one, but hopefully you've enjoyed it nonetheless. Like I said, I'm going to make one for artists as well, so that'll be out relatively soon too. But yeah, if you've got any opinions on any of these bands, if you want to talk about your own top 10 as well, or some of your favourite bands that you like as well, feel free to let me know. And yeah, just open discussion in the comment section. That's what these videos are ultimately about for me. I like talking about music. I know other people who like talking about music. And I think it's a bit better to do something like this instead of, going into a comment section and just looking at somebody else's list and just saying this is very surface level, or this is mid or basic or something like that. Popular albums are popular albums for a reason, in my opinion, and they're the base of where everybody who loves music goes into first, I think, to discover what they ultimately like. But I'm going to stop rambling now. And well, I'll see you all in the next video, and hopefully we can talk about more of this in the comment section or in future videos. So have a good night.